Will Dinley at about past. We're going to be asking him all sorts of questions about everything that's gone on in the past week. We're going to be trying to pack in as many of the latest current events as we possibly can. Obviously, it's pretty difficult because there's so much going on at the moment. So it's difficult to figure out what we include in this show, what we include in the podcast, what we talk about in our interviews. But we're going to try and cram in as much as we possibly can. Um, First of all, Brett, how are you doing, mate?
I'm all right. I'm all right, thank you. How are you?
Good. Yeah, not too bad. How are you finding this lockdown? We ran a poll earlier, asking people if they felt like their mental health had taken a toll during this lockdown. And I think something like 77% of people who answered said that it had, which is pretty worrying, pretty disheartening. I think the whole country at the moment's struggling with everything and the fluctuation between lockdowns and not knowing what's going to happen. Businesses closing. It's difficult to find a job. So, do you feel like your mental health has taken a toll in this
Yeah,
lockdown?
yeah, definitely, definitely. I don't know if I um think it has more so than the first
Right.
lockdown, but then the first lockdown was longer, so I definitely feel like I've reached similar lows as I did then. Um, yeah, I mean, I can't say that I'm particularly surprised though that people are saying that such a large portion of people are saying that they have been affected, and that their mental health has taken a bit of a hit.
Yeah, I mean, I think mine has been impacted more this time around than it did the first time, and I think it's predominantly to do with having that period where we were able to go and see people, and there was this semblance of normality that came with being able to go out for dinner and for drinks and see family members that you hadn't seen in ages. And even in the
Yeah.
first lockdown, there was this feeling, especially in my village, and as you know, I live in a fairly small village just outside of a town, and
Mm,
there was a real sense of community here. There was a real
right.
sense of everyone pulling together and doing something good for the community. Lots of we were running a relief program for people that were isolating or shielding, where we were collecting food and essential items and books for people, and it was really nice.
Yeah.
And that's completely gone out the window this time round. It really feels like it's everyone
Really.
for themselves
Yeah.
this time, and I think a lot of people were talking about there being a new normal and
Hmm.
people coming together, and this being how we are from now on, this sense of community, and it doesn't feel like that this time round. And
No.
it definitely, my mental health has definitely taken more of a toll this time round than the time before.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah,
but
because we
we're
were kind of teased, weren't we, during the summer,
yeah.
and when we had those few months where we were sort of starting to, it looked like we were going to be able to start doing things that were once normal again, but slowly deteriorated back into this lockdown
Yeah,
state.
although some people might say that this was always going to expected to happen because of the way
Sure.
that we dealt with the virus in the first place. But there
Yeah.
has been some good news recently. Lots of vaccine news, lots of purchasing of vaccines, lots of vaccines with higher efficacy ratings. The latest one, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, up to 90% efficacy if it's tailored, if the taking of it's tailored in a certain way. It is around 70-75%, I think, normally. So
Right.
that's obviously fantastic news, and incredible how quickly these vaccines have been rolled out. Considering that it can take a decade to get a vaccine, how quickly these have been rolled out, and seemingly they're great.
Yeah.
Um,
Just goes to show what people can do on a global effort or on
yeah,
a global scale when it's needed.
yeah, it is truly incredible. I think, and there's hope and that is at the end of the tunnel with all of this vaccine news, and I think we needed it, especially coming up to Christmas. Now, again, there's so much uncertainty at the moment.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that it's going to be available. Vaccines are going to be available to NHS staff very soon in the next few weeks, I think. So that's good, and hopefully, I mean, I'm not so sure about a lot of this testing, the rapid result testing that's coming out. I think there's a lot to be worried about. I wrote for Demographica last week about the British Medical Journal, who wrote a piece saying how the testing uh, that's been undergone in Liverpool,
Mhm.
it's not working very well. There seems to be, in people that are asymptomatic, a 50% false response rate, which really
Right.
isn't good. So, I mean, more people are going to be being told to self isolate than need to. It doesn't seem like is particularly effective in certain circumstances. So that's obviously worrying. But if they can tailor that and get that out, that's obviously going to be really important. Countries in Europe have it, so hopefully through Christmas and into the new year, we can start to move forward a little bit more. What did you think, just briefly? I know it's difficult to comment at the moment about the new restrictions that are being in place. Boris Johnson, I think it was about 3 or something like that, wasn't it? He put out a statement. So, what did you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know what to trust. Really, we're going back into a tiered system, right? Um, and I'm not entirely sure of what the differences will be, if there are any differences to the new tiers. So to it just it didn't seem like the tier system before was working particularly as much as they intended it to. So if there isn't any extreme changes, then what to say that we won't end up in a similar situation again?
Yeah,
Um, I can't say that I feel particularly reassured right now about the plan.
yeah, and I think that's what everyone's worried about, isn't it? Is cases going up over Christmas, people either flouting the tiered system or it not working like it really didn't work beforehand.
Yeah,
People, the government not acting fast enough, and then us having to go into restrictions again. Which I mean, we can't keep fluctuating between these constantly, can we? It's just it's not going to work. So
no,
hopefully it does, and hopefully people stick to the tiers. And some of the rules seemed a bit vague, like you can only have a alcoholic beverage with a substantial meal
yeah,
in what was it, tier
in tier
two,
two, I
which
think, yeah,
seems like a strange way of marking out the differences between the rules. But
for
um,
sure.
fingers crossed the a lot of the advice will be taken now. And when the scientific advisors who know what they're talking about, these people are experts in their fields, give
Hmm.
advice, the government will heed that advice. And a bit of
Yeah,
decisiveness in these situations is what's needed,
yeah.
and actually
I
sticking to a plan.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll hear, because I think the prime minister is supposed to be holding a conference at 7 o'clock this evening.
Yeah,
So with scientific advisors. So hopefully we'll hear a bit more then, specifically about why they believe this is the right course of action, and maybe a bit more of an elaboration on what the new tiers will consist of.
yeah, for sure. I just wanted to come back to vaccines quickly, and there's obviously a lot of talk about vaccines at the moment, and some anti-vax denialism, and
Hmm.
that comes with the territory of any kind of political discourse at the moment. I know you listened to James O'Brien's show when he was talking about this last week, and there was some interesting calls that he got. Have you got any queries about the vaccine, or any worries about the vaccine, or do you trust that these people know what they're doing, and
Yeah.
that
I trust our our scientists and doctors to who are experts in the field, and in a field that I have no knowledge about whatsoever. I trust them to know what they're doing and to be trying to fight for this common goal. I don't really see why anybody wouldn't. I guess it just seems weird.
Yeah, I think that there's a willingness or a want to find a conspiracy in absolutely anything at the moment,
Yeah,
isn't there? And
yeah,
some of the stuff is just so ridiculous. I mean, a satanic cabal is behind the rolling out of vaccines that are going to
yeah,
implant microchips into all of us so that we can all be tracked. But like, and it's just got so many holes in it. But
yeah, yeah,
the thing I find so funny about the tracking stuff, whether it be 5G or a vaccine that inputs a SIM card into my blood, why would anybody want to track me? I'm not going anywhere or doing anything that interesting. I'm
no,
really not. It's
no,
like, not your life isn't a James Bond film. That people
no.
don't want to track you going down to Tesco, doing a bit
The
of
amount of
shopping.
effort and money that would cost
Yeah.
to do that for really no gain.
Plus, people have their location settings turned on their phones.
It's true.
You know,
It's true.
like that a lot of that stuff is occurring anyway, and we're giving permission to corporations to do it. It doesn't take a satanic cabal to come together, and
No,
um, it's just
I don't understand these people saying that, like, the vaccines will have a chip in them that is meant to go into your brain and control you and kill you. There were a bunch of people arguing that on James O'Brien's show, and I was like, surely if people were trying to kill you, they wouldn't create a vaccine in the first place.
Yeah, but coronavirus isn't
Maybe.
real also, Brett.
Oh, right, right.
So nobody's
That's
actually
okay, that's
dying of
what I got
coronavirus.
wrong there. Right.
I watched a yeah, I watched a nurse from South Dakota
Mm,
go on CNN to discuss. I'm pretty sure it was South Dakota. Go on to discuss the restrictions there, and their mayor is fairly right wing, and there've been like no restrictions whatsoever. There's loads of mass gatherings going along, a lot of Trump rallies, a lot of yeah, as I say, mass gatherings occurring there. And she went on and said that she's getting patients come in and they're dying, they can't breathe, their oxygen levels are like they're about to die, and the nurses and doctors are like, we need to get you to speak to your family over FaceTime and stuff because this isn't looking good. We're going to do everything we can to help you. And they're like, I don't need to speak to anyone. I'm not going to die. I don't believe in coronavirus. This is probably just flu or pneumonia. Or one person, she said that one person even said that it's probably lung cancer, as if that makes it any better. And until the moment where they're about to die, they still do not believe that this is a thing.
I feel sorry for those people because
Yeah,
I
so
think
do
in
I.
that situation, they're probably because you're in such a state where your only option is to deny or
Mm,
to just to refuse to believe that that could be a possibility. That it must mean the chance of actually trying to accept that is just too big of a thing for them to be able to comprehend, or and
got to the,
that's
how have we got to that point?
I don't
Like,
know.
how
I
many
don't know.
failures have there been that we've got to that point? And there's obviously so much misinformation about, and on so many levels, we haven't done enough to combat that misinformation. Whether it's social media companies, and I don't believe in censorship, but um, ensuring that people access different kinds of information, not creating echo chambers. Us as individuals who want to try and spread uh, reality, have we not
Hmm.
done enough to combat those ideas? Have the media not done enough to combat those ideas? How can we move forward and try and create a situation where people aren't on their deathbed denying that a deadly pandemic is actually about and is actually a threat? How can we move forward and try and tackle that? It's so bizarre that we even have to have that discussion. And then when a vaccine rolls out, something that we should all be happy about,
Yeah.
there's this belief that it's there's some plot to kill us. It's
I mean, I think those people are probably a minority, and they get a platform because they're a minority. They think of these extreme things, so people think, "Wow, that's interesting. Let's get them on to talk about it."
mm,
And it makes it sound like or feel like to us that they're probably more popular or more common than they actually are.
yeah, yeah.
That would be my theory.
We've had a couple of questions. So, Mr. Rager, which I think is Jake, asks, "Do you expect another lockdown to come out of the new tier system?"
If it doesn't, if like the previous tier system, it doesn't seem to help very much, then it's a possibility. But I don't know. I don't know if the government would try to enforce a third lockdown.
Yeah,
I don't know if they could, because especially given how, I've already noticed people in the streets not really particularly paying attention to this lockdown as much as they were to the previous one. So
true. Yeah,
the more lockdowns we have, the less likely people are to obey the rules. I think so.
yeah.
I don't know.
I think it hinges on a few things. I think it hinges on how quickly we can get a vaccine rolled out,
Mm,
um, whether or not cases continue to decrease over the Christmas period, and how much they spread over the Christmas period, and how well we roll out this rapid response testing. If we can get testing rolled out where you can have a result in 15 minutes, then I think there's a good chance that there won't be, and that we can get the world or the country back to some semblance of normality, hopefully. But it hinges on those things, I think. And from the start, when they introduced this or circuit breaker lockdown, or when there was even discussion that there should be another a circuit breaker lockdown, people were saying use that time to take the strain off of the NHS,
hmm
but also to figure out a plan of action as to how we're going to make sure we don't have to go into this again. And again, people have said that, and again, that hasn't been what has happened. So
No.
we need to make sure that everyone's working towards ensuring that we can be in a position on the 2nd of December or after Christmas where we don't have to go back into lockdown again, and that's what hopefully the government will be focusing on, and hopefully they'll follow the advice. We have another question from Ryan, Ryan, who's always here asking fantastic questions. says, would you agree that there is also an issue with people not being able to scrutinize or pose questions around vaccinations because of the assumption that any critique is associated with anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theorists? That's a really interesting question.
Uh, I don't know. I don't know if I've really noticed people. There isn't. I don't think I've noticed an assumption when people ask questions about the vaccine that they are automatically anti-vaxxers.
Right.
I don't know if I've noticed that
I think it
anywhere
probably
particularly, but
exists. I think that
yeah,
there is some that probably exists somewhere, and I think that if your worry about a vaccine is that um, there hasn't been enough scrutiny and there hasn't been enough time taken to test the vaccine and ensure that it's rolled out in a safe manner, then that's kind of more fair enough. You know,
yeah.
that's a genuine
But then
query. But I would,
you would need to
sorry,
talk to the people involved in
exactly.
making it.
Yeah, and I don't think that they would roll out a vaccine that hadn't been tested thoroughly enough. And
No.
maybe we don't know the long-term effects of a vaccine. I think we've seen lots of scientists say that this is something that might only be able to be this might be something that's only effective for a year, and then you
Mhm.
have to take another course.
Like the jab.
Yeah, like the flu jab, exactly. So I think that there are maybe some um, realistic queries, but I would also say, like we said before, trust that these people know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Trust that the right testing will be done. They'll be really sure that the efficacy is correct, and that we won't be put in danger with the vaccine. And that would
Mm.
be what that would be what I would say to that. Um,
Yeah.
so just to change the subject, there's been uh, some awful attacks in France, some terror attacks in France, and subsequently the French government is taking steps to try and in what they see to reduce the chances of that happening, but also to reinforce some what they call French Republic values.
Mm.
So you know more about this than I do. If people don't know, Brett, you grew up in France.
Yeah.
Would you like to just take people through what's been going on there, and we can talk about some of the things that have been happening?
Sure. So yeah, so there were various terrorist attacks that happened earlier this month and the month before. One in particular, a teacher was beheaded in a school for showing a cartoon depiction of Muhammad. And then the president Macron came out and sort of denounced it and said that it was an attack on a front on their free speech, and he sort of denounced Islamic extremism. Um, and then various countries in the Middle East sort of took that to mean that it was an attack on the religion itself, which prompted further attacks in France. And a good bunch of them were stopped, luckily. But there was one in Nice in particular where, again, an elderly couple was beheaded outside of a church. Pretty barbaric incidents. So, but yeah, the president came under a bit of scrutiny about it, and because for saying things that even at the time when I saw the headlines, I thought that they were taking his words. They were poorly translating his words, and it was important to note at the time, I think, that his what he was trying to say was that Islamic extremism has no place in the French in France, um, and he I think one of the reasons that the Islamic community got quite upset is because he called. I think the furthest he went was he said that Islam was a religion in crisis. Um, but he was referring to the fact that um, there's a very small section of the religion that is extremist and is promoting violence and enacting these terrible attacks. Over the last week, the um, president announced, like Jack said, that he would be that he was asking Muslim leaders in France to agree to a charter of republican values, which aim to prevent further um, Muslims from being radicalized. Um, Now, I saw a lot of things being promoted on social media, on Twitter, by certain people who were misleading who were sort of writing out misleading summaries of these articles. The one in the BBC, for example, was uh, repeated on Twitter, but in a very crude and not accurate way. I believe I saw people saying that the measures that Macron put in place were, I've got them here. He wants the French Council of Muslims to come up with a national council of imams in order to register um, imams who are practicing the faith properly and not interfering with Republican values. So in that sense, was trying to make sure that, or he's trying to get the Muslim community in France um, to what's the word? To sort of forgotten the
Come
word now.
together and
Yeah.
ensure that sort of police themselves in a way, right? That's kind of
Yes,
the goal.
basically, police themselves and make sure that they have official imams that are just there to promote the not just there, but that are promoting a religion and that are not acting in any kind of extreme political way. If you want to call a violent attack political, I mean, I guess it is, but it's a crime more than anything. um, so he gave them, yeah, like a 15-day time period to come up with a this board of imams. I believe he had chats with them over the weekend to try and figure out how they would do this. The other measures that he's putting in place are stuff like restrictions on homeschooling and harsher punishments for those who intimidate public officials on religious grounds. Giving children an identification number under the law that would be used to ensure that they are attending school, and parents who break the law would face fines or and up to 6 months in jail. Also, a ban on sharing the personal information of a person in a way that allows them to be located by people who want to harm them. But I saw a lot of people online saying that children will be given an identification number to help locate them, which makes it sound like in these posts that I saw online, we made it sound like Muslim children in particular were being targeted, and that they were being targeted to keep track of them to see where they were located, which is not the case. All they're doing is suggesting a law that would help uh, monitor when all French children are going to school and when they're not. And I think we have a similar rule in the UK where it's to prevent parents from not sending their kids to school, basically. Um, as both countries believe that children have a right to an education. The other point that I saw in online was that Muslims were not allowed to take political actions, which makes it sound like they're not allowed to participate in politics in any way, which is not true either. It's that he's simply trying to stop um, any extremist action, and obviously Muslims are perfectly well in their right to go and um, practice any form of politics, but
Yeah. The the
it's
other
led to a
thing,
lot of confusion, I
yeah, the
think.
other thing that I saw this morning was a video. I showed this to you, a video of the French Interior Minister who
Yeah.
was talking about um, essentially exporting people who didn't obey laws
Yes.
in France. Anyone who didn't obey or was critical of the new laws would be exported,
Yeah.
or exported, deported. Sorry,
Deported.
um, um, which was translated incorrectly, or was twisted. He wasn't actually
Yeah.
saying that. Um,
Yeah. It's just as somebody who reads French news myself, or has the ability to read French news. I did some research last night after seeing all this and found various articles explaining the conditions and what Macron is planning on doing, and it just proved to me how misleading all these sort of anglophone media outlets are being in relation to this. I saw an article in Le Parisien, which is a Paris-based newspaper, denouncing these people on social media that are spreading fake news by saying that Muslim children are being given identification numbers, which is not true. It's all children in France are being given identification numbers, or will be once these rules are set in stone. But a lot
well,
of people, yeah,
I fell into this trap. I fell into this trap. I was reading this news as it was coming in and thinking, Jesus Christ, the the French people or the French government is moving towards some semblance of authoritarianism. They're threatening to deport people who don't agree with these laws. They're clamping down on Muslim communities. This looks really awful. And then sat down
Yeah.
with you and discussed it. And I don't agree with all of the restrictions that the French government are putting in place now. I don't agree with the way that they're tackling, or some of the way that they're going about tackling this issue. But I was completely misled into thinking that they were doing things that they just weren't doing because of the way that English media outlets were
Hmm.
reporting the issue. And that's, I think, really dangerous. And I think the point that we maybe don't have time, we can maybe ask Will what he thinks about some of these new restrictions. But um, I think that the point that we're trying to make here is that it's so important with any news story that if you're interested in learning about it, please, please, please read the full article,
Yeah.
read articles from different sources. Brett, like something that you pointed out was the tweet that you saw get sent out that was
Uh-huh.
critiquing this thing, linked to a BBC article that debunked the points that he made in the tweet.
Yeah. Yeah. I went
It's
to that article because I saw his points. I thought that sounds dodgy. I'm going to read the article, and the article completely, basically debunks it. If unless you look really far into it and for some reason add, well, I don't really know why you would add like Muslim in front of the children section of that article, or why you would automatically assume it means just Muslim children when it clearly didn't, in my opinion. Uh, I don't know, but it's worrying. It's
yeah,
worrying that
it is.
that
Yeah,
this sort of stuff is being propagated online, and people
yeah.
will just believe whatever they say, whatever they see straight
Yeah,
away.
yeah, and
Um,
again, we all fall into the trap. We all
Absolutely
fall
do.
into the
Yeah.
trap, and it's something that I really try and stop myself from doing. And even I, on this issue, just
Mm,
read a couple of headlines and
yeah.
took that as being gospel, which
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it is.
We live in a society that promotes sensationalism, so we're always going to headlines are out there to shock people. So
Yeah,
if you see them, you are automatically going to be shocked, and you're gonna have a reaction. But um, yeah, it's a shame because I think there are other things should be being talked about right now instead of, is Macron Islamophobic, um, or France is now an authoritarian regime or whatever.
yeah,
And it makes
and
you wonder if other countries with other non English speaking languages are also putting out certain articles, or are announcing certain new measures, and our media is completely misrepresenting what they're saying.
yeah. Um, so yeah, again, just caveating it all. And I don't necessarily think there's a problem with having the conversation at all. I think if we're going to have the conversation, we need to have it on the right terms and with the
Yeah,
right background, and with
yeah,
the right
with the right
foundational knowledge.
understanding of the
Yeah,
facts.
yeah, precisely, precisely. And I think there is a conversation to be had about France,
Yeah,
about French, about freedom of speech, about Islamic attacks, which seem to happen, um, far too often in France. There's conversations to be had about all of this stuff, and we need to
sure.
sit down and have those conversations. We need to include people from those communities in the conversations. And we shouldn't have to say this, but obviously we do because of the amount of bigotry that's out there. It isn't obviously isn't all Muslims in France or in any country that believe these kinds of things. There are
No,
plenty of Muslims who are trying to reform the religion, and that constantly denounce and constantly do work to out um, extremists in their communities, like in
yeah,
every community. But we need to be able to have the conversation. We need to be able to have conversations about this thing. So before we bring Will in, I just wanted to ask you briefly about your thoughts on Priti Patel's bullying allegations. For those of you that don't know, there was an independent investigation by the civil service into whether Priti Patel had been bullying members of the civil service in the Home Office. That report concluded that she had been bullying um, members of the civil service in the Home Office.
mm,
Um, Boris Johnson heard about what that report was going to say, asked the I forget his name. I should have his name on hand, but I don't. The gentleman that was commissioning this report to alter the wording of the report. He refused to do so, rightly so, and said that if Boris Johnson doesn't back the report when it gets released, that he'll resign. Boris Johnson didn't back the report when it was released. Said that Priti Patel that he'd done investigations. There wasn't enough evidence to suggest that Priti Patel was bullying members of the Home Office, and the gentleman that commissioned the report ended up resigning. So, an independent report finds out that Priti Patel has been bullying members of the Home Office. She doesn't. She isn't forced to resign. She doesn't resign. It also suggested that she broke the ministerial code when she was
Yeah.
bullying. This is the second time that Priti Patel has broken the ministerial code. She was removed from a position before for breaking the ministerial code. Brett,
Under
what did you
Theresa
make of
May.
this? Yeah, by under Theresa May. Yeah,
Well, for starters, his name was Sir Alex Allen.
thank you.
But I was pretty dumbfounded. I can't believe that somebody who's broken the ministerial code already and who got removed from position for that can break it again for bullying and be let off the hook. All she has to do is put out a bit of a statement saying, not even saying I'm sorry, saying I'm sorry that you felt that way
Yeah,
about my behavior, and then gets away with it scot free. Apparently,
yeah, yeah.
um, it's a disgrace on for Boris Johnson for doing that, for not listening to the advice, and it's a appalling for as a representation of how we deal with bullying in our society and at
I,
the workplace.
I completely agree. I completely agree. It sends a really bad signal everywhere else. It essentially it's almost impossible to be sacked from this cabinet. It seems, and
Yeah.
it came out that Priti Patel in the last 2 years has sacked something like 17 workers in the Home Office for bullying. You know,
Hmm.
yeah, like Jake says, I wish I could say that I'm surprised, but I'm really not. And that was kind of my thought. It was like I read the headline and was like, Jesus, again, really again, and then said, okay, it's this government. Am I surprised? Not really. So we're gonna get our first or our guest today, Will in. First of all, we have a comment by Ryan who says, despite vast misinformation, do you also think online media could be a savior almost in the sense that more people are developing mistrust of the mainstream media and are turning elsewhere, e.g., you guys? I hope so. I do hope so. And
Yeah.
I hope that people turn to new media outlets because there are fantastic new media outlets out there that are trying to do things in a different way, trying to
Just
have long form conversations.
get your news from multiple places.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't trust
Absolutely.
Twitter.
Yeah, don't
That's what I
create
would
echo
say.
chambers around yourself, and try and find things as broadly from as broad a places as you can, and have conversations with people. So, Will, I
Yeah.
think can you hear us? Could you pop your video on? Will, that'd be great. Perfect.
Yes, hiya. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
It's great to speak with you. It's always great to have different opinions on the show. I think you'll have a different perspective on some of the issues than us today, but that's what that's what we're all about. We've just been speaking about the Priti Patel bullying allegations. What did you make of that? What were your thoughts on that? Did you think that she should have been removed from her post? Do you think that the independent investigation findings should be listened to and should be enforced? Were you disappointed, or do you not think that there was any legs in it?
Well, obviously, the guy's an advisor. He did his. He's very obviously he's very skilled in what he does. He did the investigation, rightfully so, just to make sure that there was absolutely no solid ground for. She's a very horrible woman to work with, kind of issue, and obviously it's been on the desk for quite a while. They said since July, and obviously the PM, I'm assuming, has taken quite a long time to come to his decision, especially since the public backlash to to his move so far has been quite large. I think she's a great Home Secretary. I'm sure by the way that she acts in Parliament, she's quite a stern woman. She knows what she wants and she wants it done very quickly. The Home Office is notoriously hard to reform. It's very difficult to sort of get a different opinion in there. They seem to work well with the Blair Brown government, but have sort of been against the Theresa May, Sajid Javid, Rudd, Patel sort of viewpoint on things. But in the end, it's the PM's decision to declare whether she broke the ministerial code in enough ways to render her tender her resignation. And in this case, although the report did say bullying, looking at many definitions of bullying by different websites and looking at the actual ministerial code definition of bullying, I do think that there was ground to keep her on, and the PM has to stand by his decision and can't flip flop on it. And as long as he does that, I can support him in it.
I mean, the ministerial code was broken, right? That was what was found, that the ministerial code was broken. There was an independent investigation that went on. The independent investigation suggested that certain action was taken, and the Prime Minister decided not to act on that information, it seems pretty conclusive that she was, at the very least, incredibly abusive to Home Office staff. And the fact that we even have to make our judgment based on to what extent she broke the ministerial code, not did she break the ministerial code or not. Do you not think that that's a bit of a sad indictment as to where we are as a country?
Yeah, it's sort of the argument of breaking international law in a limited and specific way. It's sort of that kind of, it's sort of bringing back up that kind of rhetoric again. But I think it was definitely a lot more a political decision as well, as the Tories love Priti Patel. The voters, love Priti Patel. They really think that she's a force for good for conservative values, social conservatism, etc., immigration. And, I think that Boris is definitely going to need her after Brexit to sort of steady the tide of immigration, use the new powers we get from leaving the EU to sort of re-energize our immigration system. And I bet I think he thinks that the only way to do that is to keep Priti on. And whilst it is I do tend to agree with you that although it's a shame that we have to go, oh, did she break it by how much? The vote, I don't think that the party would have really liked her decision, and obviously he's got to think about the party. And he sent out a little letter today saying, "Do not bully anyone. Stop leaking stuff." Basically, to put it in layman's terms. And I think if she's working well with the new general secretary there, and she's trying to create a new, better environment, then I say second chances are deserved by everyone. So I hope that she can regain control.
This is just to step in. This is her second chance because she already broke the ministerial code in a different government. Why is it that this government has a different standard for sacking people when they break the ministerial code than the previous Conservative government did?
I was looking at the research behind it, and it seemed to me that what the MPs were saying is that Theresa May, obviously, she stuck with the rules, and she was very hang tight on the ministerial code, but the party weren't always in favour of the decisions that she made by breaking the ministerial code and letting people go willy-nilly, especially when she was getting many resignations, as she was getting back then. And obviously, Boris knows what he wants, and as does Priti. And I think that he, especially at this time, doesn't really take. It's difficult. He doesn't really need to make such big decisions based on investigations like this, just because he needs to keep his party on side, because they've had such big splits. And I think although it's terrible what may have happened with how far the extent of the bullying actually was, he needs to keep his party on side. And I think as soon as he does that, gets through the new year, maybe in the cabinet reshuffle she may get moved. But for now, I think he really needs to keep party unity together and voter unity together.
Do you think that's a good enough of a reason to ignore bullying allegations? Because what does that sort of say to the rest of the country and to other people in other industries that also face that day to day have to face, being bullied by their superiors or whoever else they might work with?
I did actually ask a couple of people within my family and a couple of people out within my family's friends who work in the private sector, a lot of different companies who are who vote for various different parties. So it's not just a Tory poll sort of I did, but I read out the actual allegations that was put against her and what the actual investigation found, and I think 95% of about 30 people that I asked said that this would actually regard as a slap on the wrist in the private sector, or a disciplinary letter, or spoken disciplinary. So, to be honest, although it's been exploded by the press and things, and it's been a big story, as it should be, I don't think in the real world or in the private sector that, especially people who are pretty settled in with jobs, would regard of what she did, if they actually read into what she did instead of just read the title of bullying, what she actually did, then they would think, oh well, I wouldn't.
What is it she actually
may
did
get
then?
a bit of slack.
She was pretty abusive to people. She said that civil servants were fucking useless. she was abusive to them when they didn't have work in, or when they were raising questions as to some of the suggestions that she had. And like, there's you read that sort of thing, and there's the sort of thick of it, jovial nature that all of this stuff gets looked at with. But I can tell you now, if it happened within, if that sort of thing happened within Demographica, I wouldn't keep people on for very long. If that sort of thing was happening in my part-time work, I would definitely raise it with superiors and would press for that person to have disciplinary action against them. I don't think it's acceptable in the private sector, or especially in government, when we should be holding people to as high a standard as possible, to be abusive to civil servants that are trying to help you do their job. And I don't necessarily buy into this idea that the civil service hate this government and they're trying to backlog everything that they're trying to do. I think it's their job to properly help to formulate policy, and abusing people isn't the way to get stuff done. And I also think that it's somewhat hypocritical of the government to suggest that actioning or implementing the findings of some independent reports is right and others isn't right. I think that you have to be consistent on this kind of thing. And just because politically you agree with somebody doesn't mean that you should put the findings of an independent investigation to the side. I think that you should have consistency. You should have a moral compass. You should have a moral code, and that's what you should stick to. So to move on, then, what did you think of this decision not to freeze the pay of frontline workers? Will, did you think that was that was a mistake? Do you think the backlash of that is going to be worth the money that's going to be possibly saved? Or
well, the word austerity seems to have come back quite very quickly ever since this news sort of broke. The title austerity, even obviously freezing pay doesn't mean austerity, but it happened during the Cameron era, and you've got to look at it. I think I have to look at it in a balance of what have private sector workers been through this whole pandemic? What have small businesses, private PLCs, LTD businesses been through this pandemic, with getting 0 to 80% of their income most of the year, getting their businesses being shut down, millions of unemployed? And then I think, what about the public sector workers? Although it may have been through a stressful time, I'm not saying they haven't, but I don't agree with the idea that every single public sector worker has been through an extremely rough COVID time. At the NHS, absolutely, they've done brilliantly, and everyone who's worked during there. But I think they have to look at it in a sensible way. And the fact that the private sector basically pays the public sector to do what they do, I think it'd be absolutely totally unfair for them to get inflation busting pay rises, when I think wage growth in this country has been, in private sector especially, has either gone down or been stagnant this whole year. And to add on to that point, finally, I think if Parliament want to do that, okay, but the MP should also not get that 3,300 extra pounds that they were supposedly supposed to get from the IPSA or ISPA this year, because that'd be totally unfair as well, and they don't deserve it, in my opinion, either.
Well, I agree with you on that. And that was going to be my follow-up question, actually. Do you think that considering everything that NHS workers have gone through, and there's been economic supports for people in the private sector, in my opinion, they haven't gone far enough. There should have been far more economic supports for people in the private sector to be able to get through this. I don't know the last time NHS workers got pay rise off the top of my head. I don't think that their pay, from what I know, is in line with inflation, or their pay has gone up in line with inflation. Do they not deserve some recognition for the work that they've done in keeping everybody safe over the pandemic? If not before the pandemic, did they not deserve it? Do they not deserve some recognition for that?
Yeah, well, I think nurses are still on their 3-year agreement with the government for their pay. Doctors and other NHS staff, I believe, got one this September, in line with when the teachers got them, the police got some, the armed forces got some, etc. But it's difficult for me, because I think that this year especially, the NHS has been funded, I think, incredible sums of money, billions upon the usual 130 odd billion it costs to run the NHS per year. And I think I was having this debate with a lady last night who works at the NHS in Chelmsford, and she said that although she would love a pay rise, what she really wants is her job to be easier. And I think that the funding that gets given, I think instead of funding pay rises, we need to start making the job easier, and we need to start reforming the NHS, not to privatise it, but to reform it. As when I say reform, I get jumped on for meaning privatise. It doesn't mean that. It means making the managerial system much easier, making people have more control of what they're doing within the hospital. And they got rid of the debt. I don't know if you remember, but before the first lockdown, Matt Hancock waived the 16 billion debt on hospitals. So there's huge pressure taken off these hospitals, and they can really make something of the funding that they're getting, especially during the vaccine period and our pre-COVID, the pre-hospital peak of COVID. I think they really need to make use of the funding they've got to make the workers' jobs much easier. And I don't think it's all about pay, but of course, that's the way I'd like to send my appreciation to them, by making the jobs easier.
Yeah, I do agree. I completely agree, but I don't think that it's one or the other. I think that we can have both. I think that the NHS does need reform. I completely agree. There's a lot of wastage in the NHS. It's already being privatised through the back door, which clearly hasn't worked. Year upon year, NHS workers' jobs get harder and harder. Um, we haven't seen the shortening of waiting times or these world beating, whatever the phrases may use, hospitals that have been promised by successive governments. So both things need to happen, in my opinion. We need to have the NHS have far less pressure put on it. It's pushed to breaking point almost every year, but also I think the pay rise for frontline workers and for public sector workers is something that is warranted and is needed, and I think that pay should be raised anyway, specifically, especially the minimum wage, and yeah, I don't think that it's one or the other. What I was going to say is that I don't necessarily think that it's helpful that the government is wasting billions and billions and billions of pounds on PPE procurement contracts to people who have absolutely no experience in the creation of PPE. And I don't think that's releasing the pressure on the NHS. We've seen pictures of NHS workers in bin bags because they don't have the protective equipment that they need. That's not something that anybody should be promoting. It's something that's consistently happening under this government as well.
Yeah, it's. I don't know. I haven't seen the bin bag story, but yeah, they're calling it the crony virus now, and this cronyism that's in the government is really going to start rotting it from the outside in by the voters. They're not. Now taxpayers' money is going to need to be so transparent to make sure that it's being spent well, that this kind of stories keep popping up with hundreds of millions of pounds being spent. It's just such a bad look politically, and it's just so awful when you think morally. Why are you giving this money to your pals when you could be giving it to, even if it's a Labour voter who can actually do the job for you? It's just it's really, but it's really getting on people's nerves, I think, now, which is why the Tories aren't escaping the poll deficit that they've got, and they need to start acting properly and be more transparent with the money they're spending.
Yeah, it's corruption, straight up corruption, isn't it, at the centre of government? I don't know if you saw the picture that was circulating over the weekend, but there was a Tory councillor who was awarded £100 million contract. Last year, his company registered a £500,000 loss, which is obviously awful. We don't want to wish that on anybody. But if you're somebody that's a proponent of the free market, of free market competition, that isn't necessarily a company that's performing particularly well. Should they, if we have a competitive tender process, be being given £100 million contracts to procure PPE? He's just bought a £1.5 million house with something like 100 acres of land. When so many people in this country are struggling, it takes the piss a little bit. I think.
Yeah, it's not very good at all, and obviously, it's got to stop, and it's got to stop very quickly. And I'm glad that the vaccines, at least, have they funded very viable options like the Oxford vaccine, which is brilliant news today as well.
Yeah, for sure. Brett, did you have a question?
No, not really. No. If you wanted to.
Yeah, something else we wanted to ask you about was after the US election. I'd actually be interested in getting your thoughts on the US election, because we haven't had a chance to speak too much since the election live stream, which you joined us for. So,
Yeah.
well, first of all, what are your thoughts on everything that's going on at the moment? You kind of predicted on election
Oh,
night that all of
yeah.
this stuff was going to happen. What have you thought?
Well, I came off the live stream, went downstairs and turned on the TV, and he was Florida. He's losing Florida, and you just think, oh, he's gone now. Then I came back, and an hour later, he was winning, and I just thought, no way, is he actually going to do it again? Is he really going to do a 2016 and do it again? And then obviously it took so long to get the voting through. I can't believe in the biggest economy in the world, it takes over a week to get the votes through, but that's another story. And then he lost Wisconsin, I believe, Michigan, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and you just think, right, okay, absolutely, voter transparency is very important. Trump's got every right to legally challenge the votes, but he hasn't got a right to go on national TV and without evidence and absolutely try and dismantle the whole system. And I absolutely know, I watched it on BBC and they didn't cut away, but then they showed ABC and NBC, CNN, they did cut away because they just said this isn't true. And whilst I think, oh, you might have done that for a bit of, or for a bit biased, maybe a bit of attention, but then when I was actually listening to the words he was saying, without any evidence, I was like, oh, so when's he going to bring the evidence out? And he never did. And you just think, no, you can't be completely trying to scupper the vote system. Like he complained about it being like all Russian investigation, all that kind of stuff. But then when he tries to say, oh, there was other people trying to get involved in his election, then I think, oh, there's a lot of hypocrisy going on. So I totally accept Joe Biden won, and I think he won it by a small margin in a lot of areas, came down to tens of thousands of votes. But obviously, I'm a bit disappointed, but I'm hoping Biden and Boris can get together and have a good relationship, which is all that matters in our country, really. So hopefully he can succeed in that.
Fair enough. You mentioned the results taking so long to come in. Do you think that in this country, in the UK specifically, but do you think that this has shown that there is a need sort of in the West for electoral reform in some places?
Well, I'm obviously I don't mind. I think the first past the post system, although is unfair by is regarded to be unfair by quite a lot of people, has been the case over the last couple of years. And everyone who says that elections in this, oh, Boris never won the majority to deliver Brexit. Well, Blair never won his majority. Blair never got 50% majority, and he got 450 odd seats. So I just think, although electoral reform in the US, I think because it got done in a couple of hours on the actual night in 2016. It's different, and then you look at the red that's across the country, the Republicans and how many local seats they've got, and and they've gone up in the House, they've retained the Senate, they've got the court. So you just think, and on a local level, they've flooded America, and it looks like they've got a huge majority on the ground in local areas of Republican officials. So it is very odd to see, and that's the sort of point where I understand where Trump's thinking, right, we've gained over here, we've gained all over here, so why aren't we gaining the presidency again? And why has it been such a big? Why does it seem like such a big fraud? But then obviously Trump likes to do what he likes, so we can't really trust him.
Sorry, just more specifically about the system that we have over here. You mentioned
We have, yeah,
being past the 50% mark. We saw in 2015, UKIP were the third largest party, but they only got one seat. Is that democratic? Is that fair? Do you think?
Yeah, obviously there's big arguments for proportional representation. I believe that's what it is. But it is difficult. We have lived with this system for a huge amount of time, and I don't know any major party who's spoken about reform. The Labour Party haven't asked for reform.
Nope.
I know the Lib Dems have, and I know the Brexit Party now, the Reform Party, I believe, have.
Yep.
But I don't know if it's not in when I talk about mainstream as Tories and Labour, it's definitely not in Tories' interest to go to PR. And
why would it? Yeah,
it might be.
Why would they want
no,
it?
why would it? Yeah, why would they? But it's definitely it could be in Labour's manifesto in 2024, and that would be a huge step forward for their campaign. But at the moment, I just don't think there's big enough talk about it for it even to register in the voters' mind right now, especially. And whether it becomes more important over the next couple of years, who knows?
Do you think the system we have is democratic though? In that case,
Uh, not fully, not fully at all. But yeah, it's just, although obviously we've had it for such a long time, and to create a whole new system would be huge impact to the public, would have to require so much funding to do, and just change the whole way that we get into power. But yeah, it's just the confusion that would go with it, with who's actually in power and who's not. Where the Tories might have the most seats, but then obviously the other people start the rest of the parliament get to govern. It's just I'm not too. I don't know a lot about it, but yeah, I just think right now we need to focus on getting getting stuff done with COVID done. And if in 2024 it's sort of all flushed over and Labour want to back it, then more to them. But at the moment, it's not really hit mainstream right now. So who
Yeah.
knows? Who knows what's going to happen?
Will, sorry, go on, bro. Just to
So
finish up.
yeah, just to slightly change the topic a bit. We before you came on, we were quickly talking about the situation in France at the moment and the fact that Macron has been trying to put in place new measures to combat Islamic extremism, and how it's being portrayed over here as being very Islamophobic, misleadingly, as we were discussing beforehand. What are your thoughts on the new measures that he's suggesting putting in place?
Well, I think this is about the what do you call it? Sorry, what it's the Republican Charter, isn't it, or something like that?
Yeah.
Charter of Republican
Republican
Values.
Values Charter, yeah. Well, obviously, there's quite a big issue with Islamist terror and people not really. In France right now, we've seen with the beheading of that school teacher for just showing, I believe, just a cartoon to his students, which it was absolutely horrible reading
Mhm.
of what actually happened. To be beheaded in the street in front of everyone is just absolutely terrible. But yeah, it's very, very difficult. I understand. I really enjoy and appreciate Macron's attitude towards it. I really think that he's understanding the difference between political Islam and Islam as the religion. I think we need to take that kind of attitude in this country, especially if something was to happen in this country, and which is why I'm backing in favour of illegal immigration being halted, especially with the dinghies coming over from France. We need to get on track of that and at least make sure we've got names and details of the actual people who are coming over. Even if we can't stop the dinghies just yet, we need to get the details of people because that's really important. But I think it was like got it here, they're giving the children an identification number for school, and
Sure.
the making sure that homeschooling can't really happen. And I think it's all stemmed from stopping radicalization. And I'm I'm sort of in favour of it. Anything because it's such a big deal. It's not as huge a deal over here as it is out there, as they have the most Muslims in any Western European country. It's such a big issue over there, and I fully support what he's doing.
Sure. I think it's just an important distinction to make is that even though he is trying to separate or make sure that practicing Muslims can still practice their religion in a safe
Absolutely.
and way, he's not stopping Muslims from being political at all. He's just trying to
Absolutely.
prevent radical Islam from spreading.
Yeah, it was more in foreign interference, like foreign Islamic or political interference from Islamic leaders from across the Middle East and the
Sure.
globe. But they've had a huge reaction to it, haven't they? They want to denounce France. They don't want to buy any French products anymore, and they seem to be extremely against this sort of narrative I think he's pushing, which is quite eye-opening, to be honest.
But
But
they're well, and they're well within their rights to do so. What we need to do is
absolutely,
open up a discourse on this stuff and not shy away from the topic. Not say that anybody that criticizes the actions of extreme factions is an Islamophobe, and not suggest that anyone who wants to put an olive branch out to the Muslim community or hold discussions with the Muslim community, not call them a terrorist sympathizer. There is so much factionalism that goes on within this conversation, and if we really want to find a working solution, then we need to do so collaboratively with everybody involved. Will, that's all we've got time for, mate. But I really, really appreciate your time. It's always so interesting to chat with you, and you're always open to a really, really good debate. So, yeah, I'm sure we'll have you on soon, and really appreciate you coming on.
Lovely. Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Will.
Okay, so that's all we've got time for today. Thank you to everybody who watched. Make sure you give us a like. Make sure you give us a subscribe. Thank you so much for all your comments. We are recording a podcast tomorrow. There will be an interview with the fantastic Jaya Patak that's going up later in the week. Myself and Jay are going to be discussing some of the problems within the Labour Party at the moment and the direction of the Labour Party. We are going to be talking to Katie Powell about most of the issues that we didn't get to speak about today. So that'll be up Friday at 6 a.m. As always, thank you so much for watching. We always appreciate your support. If you want to get involved, Demographica UK on all of our social media, obviously on our YouTube channel, info@demographicauk.com if you want to send us an article or if you want to come on the podcast, and www.demographicauk.com for anything else. Brett, thanks for joining me, mate. I really appreciate it.
Mate.
Thanks to everybody else. And we'll see you in the next